Hello everyone and welcome back to The Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, The Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm doing my first Tiny Leaders Commander deck with Anim Pakal, Thousandth. She is a very cool commander from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan that when I was exploring Tiny Leaders, I found and went, well, I can definitely build a deck around this. So let's take a look and see what Anim Pakal does. Anim Pakal, Thousandth, 1 red-white, legendary creature, human soldier. Whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on Anim Pakal, then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anim Pakal. So she's a 1/2, and basically your goal is to just grow her. And what's awesome about this card is that she doesn't have to attack for this ability to trigger. It can be whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures. So you get to buff her up and do a ton of cool stuff. And I really learned a lot about Boros when I was building this deck, because I've never built a Boros deck, for myself to play. I've built them for this channel before, but, this is a deck I will be building, and it was just incredibly fun to build. So normally how I do this is I split it up based on, how the different cards interact, because there's usually a couple of different strategies in these decks. But honestly, this deck is so small because remember, Tiny Leaders is 3 mana and under and only 50 cards with a 10-card sideboard. So you do have some sideboarding options, but it's so small that I think I'm just going to run through it straight down the list so you can see everything I've included. So starting out with artifacts, I have Anduril, Nasil Reforged, Greatsword of Tyr, and Infiltration Lens. So this Sword Reforged here, sorry, I'm not going to say that again because I probably messed it up, is 2 mana legendary artifact equipment with Ascend. So this is a really cool thing. That's if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game, which is going to be very easy for us to do with our commander. But whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. If you have the City's Blessing, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control instead. So this is going to be incredibly good for just buffing up our entire board. All of those little 1/1s, if we have the City's Blessings, are now 3/3s, that extra they're 5/5s, and it's just going to be incredibly hard for our opponents to deal with us at that point. The Greatsword of Tyr is one of my favorite cards from Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate, because whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and tap one target creature defending player controls. You can basically just tap down your opponent's stuff while making your one good creature even bigger, so this is just one card I absolutely love. And Infiltration Lens, 1 mana, whenever equipped creature becomes blocked by a creature, you may draw 2 cards, equipped for 1. This was an interesting card I never found before, but I really thought it was worth trying, because if you equip this on your commander, at some point she's going to be so big that people are going to have to block her. More card draw for that, so why not? So next up, in the last 2 cards in artifacts, we have Lightning Greaves and Shadow Spear. Obviously, we want to protect our commander because the bigger she gets, the bigger a threat she's going to become, and the more she's going to want to get removed. So putting on Lightning Greaves is going to help keep her protected, along with letting her attack maybe the turn she comes out. So that's also a big plus. And Shadow Spear, one of the best cards, in my opinion, ever printed. 1 mana, legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. And then for 1 permanence, your opponent's control, lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Turning our commander into a big trample lifelink threat while also making a bunch of gnomes in the process is exactly what I want to do. So now looking at some of the creatures here, I'm in love with the creatures. I think that's my favorite part of the deck are the creatures I chose for this deck, and honestly, that's not always how I feel. There's sometimes a lot of spells or enchantments or whatever that I think are the key focus of the deck, but really these are, in my opinion, the best. So first off, we have Abzan Falconer, Einok Bondkin, and Hopeful Initiate. Abzan Falconer has Outlast, so for 1 white mana, tap, put a 1/1 counter on this creature, Outlast only as a sorcery. So by outlasting, we can put counters on our creatures, and then each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying. So like I said earlier, the whole goal with that first sword was to put counters on everything, and then we just give everything flying here. And similarly, Einok Bondkin has Outlast as well, and then each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it has First Strike, making our threats basically unblockable at some point, because if they're so big, people are just going to lose all their stuff, and our creatures aren't going to be affected at all. So that is awesome. And then we have Hopeful Initiate, a single white mana creature human warlock with training. Whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Then for 2 and a white, remove 2 +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. So that's something you got to think about here, right? We're playing a 50 card board. Destroying artifacts and enchantments are way more powerful And because you're so limited, you really have to take advantage of those cards that can do both. And this card just is amazing. We have so many things that place +1/+1 counters. Just removing it to destroy target artifact or enchantment is exactly what we want to do. And the fact that this doesn't tap, meaning we can do it multiple times per turn. Next up, we have Inti, Intrepid Adversary, and Loshel Clockwork Scholar. Inti is a new card from the Lost Caverns Ixalan as well. Legendary creature Human Knight. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on a target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. Whenever you discard one or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next turn. A little bit of exile is definitely great because we can just get rid of some stuff that we don't need. Giving trample, putting +1/+1s, it's exactly what we want to do. Intrepid Adversary is an awesome card. 1 and a white creature human scout with lifelink. Whenever Intrepid Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a white any number of times. When you pay this 1 or more times, put that many Valor counters on Intrepid Adversary. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Valor counter on Intrepid Adversary. So let's say this is turn 6. You get 6 mana on the board. You just give everything +2/+2. I mean, by that point, we should have 4 or 5 gnomes out on the battlefield. This is going to be a huge and powerful card, and I'm really surprised it's actually only $1.50. An ability this strong I thought would be much, much higher, but oh well. And lastly, we have Loshel Clockwork Scholar, legendary creature Elephant Artificer. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking artifact creatures you control. Whenever one or more artifact creatures enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So every turn, we're going to be able to draw cards, and all of that damage that we're doing is just going to be prevented to our own creatures. So every time, we're just going to have a bigger and bigger board. So I love this card. Our next 3 is Metallic Mimic, Obsessive Astronomer, and Quicksmith Genius. Metallic Mimic is an artifact creature shapeshifter that says when it enters battlefield, choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types. And each other creature you control with a chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. We're going to be choosing Gnome, obviously, and all of our Gnomes are going to enter as 2/2s instead of 1/1s. Next up is Obsessive Astronomer, 1 in a red, creature human wizard. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as Obsessive Astronomer enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, discard up to 2 cards and draw 2 cards. Obsessive Astronomer is going to be great in helping us get some of those cards out of our hand that we don't need, and I really love that. And Quicksmith Genius is probably second or third best creature-wise out of all of these, because whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. When we're making 3, 4, 5 different gnomes all at once, you can just keep pitching cards to the bin until you get everything you want into your hand. I can see Quicksmith Genius being an all-star in Tiny Leaders just for the awesome card manipulation. So next up, we have Rosie Cotton of South Lane, Steel Overseer, and Sunrise Cavalry. Rosie Cotton of South Lane says when 2 and a white legendary creature halfling peasant. When Rosie Cotton of South Lane enters the battlefield, create a food token. Whenever you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosie. So again, we're going to be creating 4, 5, 6 golems with our commander. Rosie's going to seal those golems entering and put 4, 5, 6 counters on whatever creature we want, which could be our commander, buffing her up, basically doubling the amount of tokens we make every turn. So yeah, I really like that. I really like that. Next, Steel Overseer, 2 artifact creature construct. Tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. Just another way to buff up all of our stuff. And Sunrise Cavalry, 1 red, white creature human knight. Trample and haste. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Sunrise Cavalry enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. Probably not the best card in this deck, but because it does have trample and haste, it's actually very excellent comboing up with Rosie and our commander. We can make this thing very, very big and then have a big threat to swing in right away. Next up, we have Twilight Dover and Welcoming Vampire. These are the last 2 creatures in this deck and possibly the second 2 strongest in this deck, because Twilight Dover says 2 and a white creature spirit. When a creature token leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Twilight Dover. For 2 and a white, remove a +1/+1 counter from Twilight Dover. Create 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. So our little golems are going to leave. This thing's going to get huge, and we can remove counters to make even more creatures. I love this card. It's from the original Ravnica City of Guilds set, and it is just quite amazing. So I'm very, very excited to add this to the deck. And lastly, we have Welcoming Vampire. This is an all-star card. I have this in so many different white decks. 2 and a white creature vampire flying. Whenever one or more other creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. We are definitely going to trigger this every turn if we have our little golems out there, so I'm very, very excited to have this card. Well, now let's look very briefly at our enchantments because there are only 3 of them in the deck. We have Ordeal of Heliod, Shared Animosity, and Wedding Announcement. First off, Ordeal of Heliod, 1 and a white, enchantment aura, enchant creature. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then, if it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, sacrifice Ordeal of Heliod. When you sack Ordeal of Heliod, you gain 10 life. In this format, we only have 25 life, and we really don't have anything else other than Shadow Spear in the deck to help us gain some life, so this would be a great way to just get a little boost of life. Next is Shared Animosity, 2 and a red enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. Our gnomes are going to be huge, massive threats, and this just makes them even harder to deal with. If we have 3 gnomes on the board, they're all going to get +3/+3 and just be so big and so powerful that I love this effect. And Wedding Announcement, 2 and a white enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, put an invitation counter on Wedding Announcement. If you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn, draw a card. Otherwise, create a 1/1 white human creature token. Then, if Wedding Announcement has 3 or more invitation counters, transform it. Creatures you control get +1/+1. So we're going to be able to make little 1/1s to trigger our commander with, and then all of our stuff gets a nice needed buff. Now, looking at instants, we have Call of the Coppercoats, Cathartic Pyre, and First Day of Class. Call of the Coppercoats is 2 and a white instant with Strive. This spell costs 1 and a white more to cast for each target beyond the first. Choose any number of target opponents, create X 1/1 white human creature soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of creatures of those opponents control. So basically, we're going to make creatures equal to the number of creatures each opponent controls, and just pay an additional 2 for each other opponent we choose. So this is obviously very good against other token decks, but is also just going to get us a bunch of little creatures that we can use to activate our commander with. Cathartic Pyre is 1 and a red instant. Choose one. Cathartic Pyre deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many card. And First Day of Class, 1 and a red instant. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn. And then you may learn. Now, I'm not really sure how learn works because I've never really played Strixhaven, but First Day of Class is just excellent for us anyways. And our last instant is Unbreakable Formation, 3 and a white instant. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Addendum, if you cast a spell during your main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. So quickly, I'm going to run through the lands before we get into those sorceries, but I kept the land base pretty simple here. You can kind of go all out, but I didn't want to waste too many people's times. First, we have Guild Mage's Forum. Tap it to add a colorless, or 1, tap to add 1 mana of any color. If this mana was spent on a multicolored creature spell, this creature enters battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Perfect for our commander, or any of our other cards that have 2 or more in their color identity. Next up is Ideal Grange. When it enters battlefield, tapped unless you control 3 or more other planes, and then if it enters the battlefield untapped, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control. And then there are also 8 mountains and 8 plains in this deck. And lastly, for sorceries, we have Angel Fire Ignition, Bassary's Solidarity, and Explosive Entry. Angel Fire Ignition, 1 red white sorcery. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on a target creature. It gains Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste until end of turn, and we can flashback it for 2, a red and a white. Bassary's Solidarity puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and Explosive Entry says destroy up to 1 target artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. And lastly, we have Into the Fire and Recommission. Into the Fire, 2 and a red sorcery, choose 1. Into the Fire deals 2 damage to each creature, planeswalker, and battle, or put any number of cards from your hand onto the bottom of your library and then draw that many cards +1. In Recommission, 1 and a white sorcery, return target artifact or creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If a creature enters the battlefield this way, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And that is the 50 card deck, and I'm very, very quickly going to run through the sideboard just so you can see what I decided to put in my sideboard. Because there are a lot of good utility cards, and maybe once I play this deck a couple more times, I'll figure out what else I would put in and cut. But starting out, we have Blade of the Blood Chief. Equipment. Whenever a creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. If a creature is a vampire, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it instead. Ion Storm. It is an enchantment. 1 in red, remove a +1/+1 counter or a charge counter from a permanent you control. It deals 2 damage to any target. Lion Sash. 1 in a white. White, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent card, put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. Reconfigure for 2. Luminarch Aspirant. 1 in a white. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Mace of the Valiant. 2 in a white. Artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each charge counter on Mace of the Valiant and has Vigilance. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under control, put a charge counter on Mace of Valiant. Mentor of the Meek. 2 in a white. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under control, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. Molten Psyche. 1 red. Each player shuffles the cards from his or her hand into his or her library, then draws that many cards. Metalcraft. If you control 3 or more artifacts, Molten Psyche deals damage equal to each opponent, equal to the number of cards that player has drawn this turn. Olenbach Escort, single white. Vigilance, sacrifice Olenbach Escort. Target creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. Tarian's Soul Cleaver, single white. Equipped creature has Vigilance, and whenever another artifact or creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. And lastly, we have Thrilling Discovery. Red, white. You gain 2 life, then you may discard 2 cards. If you do, draw 3 cards. And that is it. What do you think of this Tiny Leaders deck? Is this something you're interested in seeing more of? What did you think I did it right? Was there other cards I should have added? It's kind of hard building this way because you're so limited. I probably had 90 cards in this deck before I started cutting them down. And then I was so lucky you have a sideboard in this format, so I could just throw 10 more of these cards into the sideboard. But this is an awesome deck building challenge, and I really hope you enjoyed seeing this deck. And if you want to see more of these, please leave a comment down below telling me so. I'm really interested in doing more of these videos. They're very fun. And also, if you aren't subscribed to my channel, please do so. It would just mean the world to me and show me that, you like this content and you want to see more videos like this. If you would also consider sharing this video with a friend and leaving a like, that would help me get out to more people. So thank you. And today's Scryfall card of the day is Biophagus. We guarantee you that within a week, you will feel like a new man. GlaxoSmithKline Biophagus. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.